Hello everyone, back at you again with another video about the old world. Thank you for all your great reactions on the first video. It was very fun reading all of those and getting a good reaction on it, so I tend to make some more content. For this time, I'm intending to do something a little bit difficult, maybe even. I'm going to try to make an overview of all the armies in the old world as per the end of 2024. And it's my goal to show you where I think every army stands in the meta, like what's good, what's not so good, what are the trends we can see, and also to tell you per army what are things you should look out for, things you could maybe prepare or look at if you haven't played against the army before. So let's get right on with that. As normal, I'm basing this on victory point based games, not scenarios. I'm using the most general competitive outline, that being the rule 6 for core, rule 3 for everything else, and no additional comping, so no stuff like only getting to have one level 4. We're also seeing the first singles tournaments. In the old world, or we're seeing the first team tournaments, as it say, in the old world, which is very cool. There is basically no data about that yet, so it's really hard to say anything about that. Having a team tournament could really change up your army from a singles tournament, because the goals are really different. So it's important to say that I base this solely on singles tournaments. I'm also going to say that generally the data on the old world tournaments is quite bad. And I think that's actually really fun. So what you see with a lot of games, if you approach them competitively, you see that a meta developed, like data is collected, and it pretty quickly gets established which ways of playing are the best, which are the good things to do, which are the things to not do. And I think one of the reasons that hasn't really happened with the old world yet is that first off, it's a pretty good game, it's pretty decently balanced, despite what people might say, I would say. And I think because the data for the game is really quite bad, because we have all these additional comps, all these additional rules, all this different interpretation of the rules, that makes it really difficult to get, or I'd say impossible even, to aggregate any serious data on what is actually doing well and what's doing not so well. I've seen websites trying it. I'm just generally very skeptical on it, because I'm like, well, they literally are mixing in like 1,000 point, 1,500 point, 2,000 point tournaments in their data, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? You cannot use this and say, oh, this army is good or this army is bad. So I think the only real way is to look at it is from a more qualitative perspective. So just play a ton of games and see what you find, and see what things you can see. I've played around 100 games right now, so I think I'm sort of getting there. However, I'm most certainly going to oversimplify things a little bit today. So if you see any things that I could, you have more information about, do let me know. This was from just before the Empire Arcane Journal release. It has been announced, but we don't have it yet, so that you know that I heard that it's going to be pretty good, that we're going to have a good Empire gun line maybe, that I do not take that into consideration in this data. I also made some tiers for where I'm going to rank the factions. I've seen a lot of ways in people rank tiers. People are like, oh, this is S tier, this is A tier, this is D tier. It's like those tiers are kind of meaningless to me. Like what's A tier to you could be something else to somebody else, and like what is an S tier even? That grade doesn't even exist. So I'm going to rank them in tiers of where I could feasibly see that an army could win a GT, so a 2D tournament. I'll put them in the highest tier. So basically going to say that most armies that are going to win like really big tournaments, like 5-6 round tournaments, are going to be in the top tier. And I'm going to say that if you are playing another army that's not in the top tier and you manage to win a GT, I think that's it should almost be impossible unless you were probably a combination of both very lucky and very strong with your army. So I like sort of the way I want to look at it is that it's a really big accomplishment if with your lower tier army you punch above your weight, and we should see that most GTs are the top army. Most GT wins are from the top armies. Same for, of course, for one-day tournaments. The amount of games you have to play is smaller. The games you play against actually good players are a lot lower. Like we've all been to probably one-day events. We played against the two first people, which were like relatively easy for you to win. So you only have to play like against one other really good opponent to go to 3 wins and actually win the game, win the day. So that's how I sort of see that. That's why like winning a one-day tournament is obviously easier and says a lot less about how good the army actually is rather than winning a 2-day tournament. And there are also armies that I say are struggling, which I would say that if you ever like win a tournament with them, any tournament that is competitive, you're doing really well. It's quite difficult to do, and you have to probably be lucky and really knowing what you're doing. That being said, all tier lists are oversimplifications of reality. I'm going to make some archetypes in lists, but it's impossible to really say a lot about everything. But once again, it's my goal to give you a general overview and give you something to work with. And that doesn't really work out if you have to sort of limit the amount of detail you're going into. I also want to say that all except one of the armies in the game are reasonably balanced at this moment, and which you can totally learn the game with and go really far in tournaments. So even the struggling factions certainly have a fighting chance. I just think that if you play armies like that, you're handicapping yourself in some way, but it doesn't in any way mean that you shouldn't play these armies or that these armies are really a lot worse than the armies. I honestly think there's only one army that's really out of the game right now, and I will let you know what army that is when we get into things. And what I also want to say that at the end of the tier list, I will give you some general tips, some general strategies that I've seen being successful, and I'll give you some tips on how to make sure that your army list for when you want to go to a competitive event is up for it. What are the things you should be looking out for? Regarding the list archetypes, some, especially the battle army, have different types of lists they can put in to play with competitive in competitive armies, and some, especially like worse armies, are what I call sort of good stuff lists. So you don't really have a choice regarding strategy. You probably just have like 4 or 5, maybe even 3 good units in your army. You take those units, and that's sort of your list. And only the better armies really have choices to make when putting together an army. So that's what I mean with the good stuff. Like you take the good stuff in your list, and that's your list. Because if you take other stuff, you're really just shooting yourself in the foot. So without any further ado, let's actually get into the tier list. And we have to say that currently the top army in the game, I would say, is Tomb Kings. They've got a ton of different lists they can go. You can go like the normal a non-arcane journal detachment that they have and go for like 2 dragons and have like a really good aggression list with necrosphinxes. The only like really viable Death Star in the game, the Royal Host Death Star, like taking 100 skeletons that can always volley fire, never give ground, get like -1 to hit. It's like basically an unkillable unit. It's possible to be built in Tomb Kings, and we've seen already players go really far in big tournaments like the Square-based Open. So I think that's also a viable list the army can bring. It's a really complicated list. I could say a lot more about it, but do know it exists, and that if you see somebody running up with 100 skeletons and a lot of like characters with skeletons, like characters on skeleton chariots in there, that's some serious stuff going on that you can't just write that off. And except apart from these from these armies, we also have the mortuary cult bowlines, but you can both go into a sort of a necromancy route, so lower leadership and then do damage with Casket of Souls, or just be full on like bowlines and full on shooting that are also really strong. In the army, there are a lot of strong units like Bone Dragons. Casket of Souls are great, like giving pluses to cast and having really strong spells is fantastic. Just big units of skeletons are good if you're talking about the Royal Host Death Star. Usurpti with bows are mainstays in the military cult bowlines, and Tomb Scorpions are really just mainstay units. They have Swift Stride, Monster Slayer, They're really fast. They're quite cheap for what they bring. Toughness 5, so they're pretty durable, even though they're only 3 wounds. So there are a ton of strong ways you can play Tomb Kings nowadays. Another very strong army is Wood Elves. We see a very strong avoidance list from them. Basically, the idea of them is that you go multiple units of Sister of the Thorn, which can take another any spell they want. And you go Pillar of Fire, and you just move those up over the board, so you just have this wall of fire just coming at you. Especially if you do not keep 3 inches distance between all your units, they can kill multiple units, like pass their pillars over multiple units each turn, and they just do a ton of damage while you can't even see them and do anything back. And combined with that, you have like a unit of Glade Riders with reserve move, so they walk forward a bit, cast their spells, and then with their reserve move, they move back out of line of sight. So they have a ton of denial. So they just shoot at you and do stuff to you while you can't really do anything back, while you can never even see them if the Wood Elf player gets to perform their plan completely. And along with that, they have like a big dragon with like multiple minuses to hit, hunting you to make sure that you cannot just push your stuff into them, because then the dragon will kill you. So that's a strong list. Another way of building the list that is somewhat declined is like going multiple units of Wild Riders with characters in them and going more aggressive. They do a ton of damage, but of course they also die very quickly if they do not break through the animal lines. But I think that's also still a viable option the Wood Elves have. As I said, Glade Riders, because of the reserve move, and because you can put characters in them, then reserve move your characters are very strong. The Sisters of the Thorn are great with their spell that they can cast. Force Dragons are good, and a notable magical item that they have is the Oaken Stave, also known as the Broken Stave, which makes it so you can dispel up to 27 inches, and whenever you dispel, you can roll an extra d6 and discard the lowest, so that really makes it so even things like Tomb Kings, who can get like +8, +9 to cast, have some real issues getting through spells, so that's also pretty good. Another strong army, I think people will not be surprised for me to hear me say that, is Bretonnia with their Pegasus Knight aggression list. Most of them run exiles. You do not start with the blessing, but you have a chance of going first, because if you pray, you of course have to. You cannot go first. You're 100% to go second, and especially in an aggression list, like where you're going to go forward and put as much pressure as you can, it's good to actually go second. So by going exiles, you don't have to go second, so you don't really give up that aggression, and you get especially the veteran rule on all your units, and which makes so you can reroll leadership checks. And especially the undead armies, like the Castle of Souls from the undead, test your leadership and can do a ton of damage to you. And of course the vampire counts, which I will come to momentarily, can do a lot of damage with their screams, which also works based on leadership. So getting to reroll those is a really big bonus to make sure your strong Pegasus Knights actually go on there. Pegasus Knights are basically one of the best aggressive units in the game. They're really fast. They have all the good rules: first charge, counter charge, you name it. The main thing they have is like 360 degrees vision, so you can just jump them in anywhere. It's basically impossible to hide from them. And then you got a bunch of angry knights hitting you up. They're also supported by a very strong supportive unit in the name of the Green Knights. The only unit in the game currently that can come out of reserves, to come out of nowhere and just charge you. And he's ethereal, so it's really annoying to kill. So he's really good. He's another problem for your army to deal with. So basically the idea of the army is that you have basically the Green Knight, Pegasus Knights, a Duke on a Hippogriff with like Knightly Temper or like Monster Slayer, all bearing down on you, and it's just too much for most armies to handle. Especially like the Duke having Monster Slayer or getting to run a character Monster Slayer is very nice. So they also have a really good answer to opposing monsters, to opposing big dragons, which people are still running a ton of. Another very strong item to mention is the Falconhorn of Fredemund. That also makes it better to go exiles. What it does is you have to roll a leadership check at the beginning of your turn. And if you make it, enemies cannot make use of the fly rule. Now, especially since you're exiles, you have a chance to go first. So normally when you play normal Bretonians, you have to go second, and your enemy gets at least one turn of flying movement. But with exiles, you can go first, and they never have any turns of flying movement. And you have to do a leadership check, and with veterans, you get to re-roll that check as well. So where it was pretty consistent already on like your leadership 8 or 9 guy, which you may have to roll a test for every turn to stop their flying movement. Now you get a reroll on that as well. So basically, whenever you go first, like people are not going to be able to use their flying movement. And there are plenty of units in the game who have like flight 10 and movement 2, which just get absolutely eradicated by it. All the dragons have fly. Having them drop down to movement 6 and not being able to fly over units anymore, getting a lot more difficult charge, just really, really strong. I would say too strong option that they have in the book. So Bretonnians are really quite good. Next army I'm going to talk about is vampire counts. They basically have multiple list archetypes. Both vampire counts and the Tomb Kings have the undead healing, which is very good. With the Bedstone Barrier, you get to reroll your heal checks, which I think is something they kind of overlooked, that it made it very consistent. And so you can, especially if you're playing against less optimized lists, you can heal your units more than your opponents can do damage. And once that's the case, it becomes really hard for your opponent to win a game of victory points, as you might think. And vampire counts, of course, have the screams, or as they're called in the book, the wailing dirge attacks. Short range, only 8 inches, but you can do it when you're in close combat. You can do it into another close combat. It all doesn't matter. You can always scream. And they just do, you start with a leadership check at -2, and everything you fail them by, you take wounds, where you can only take ward saves against. And especially if you have like 4 or 5 screams in your army, you take multiple mortis engines, which you put behind your lines. They're large targets, so they can look over your zombie units or your infantry units. And they can just scream into close combat, and basically nothing in the game can survive that. And especially with necromancy magic, you can make that leadership check even harder and even worse for your opponent. So they, I would say, they have like the best answers against enemy dragons. It's really hard for them to come close to you, and like they're generally like very high toughness, like 2-up armor saves, like good regen saves are all useless against the scream spans, because if you have to roll like 4 or 5 of them a turn, your dragon's going to die pretty quickly, and it's going to be a ton of points for your opponent. So I think they're a good army, and with especially multiple mortis engines, they can go up to +6 to cast. I mean, it's not the +9 to cast the Tomb Kings have, but it's still a very good way of doing a ton of damage. Another thing that we have seen more recently is that instead of running the dragons in rare that can also do the screams, which are kind of flimsy. I've seen like sort of more of a move towards Blood Knights, because they have a 2-up save and you heal like 4 of them every time you heal them. It makes your army a little bit faster. Like the entire army can get a reserve move because of a spell. Getting more speed in the list, especially with like drilled Blood Knights, is really good. And I've seen like people going more towards that to put more pressure on like armies like Wood Elves or like Tomb King Bowlines to really get there and do some damage. So that you're very strong with short range shooting is not nullified by a more long range shooting. So Vampire Counts, another very, very strong army. Another very strong army are the Warriors of Chaos. We've seen a ton of aggression lists with like single dragon, even double dragon, even tons of like Chaos Lords on like normal mounts, so like horses, stuff like that. Just putting all out close combat aggression on you. And along with Bretonnia, I think they're the best army to do that. Dragon Ogres are really a part of that. They're a great cheap unit, but do a ton of damage for a reasonable price at a good toughness and a good 3-up armor save. And I think they have a pretty good core in their Chaos Knights. So you have just everything together to just get a fast, efficient, smashing army that's unless your opponent is really efficient, really knows what they're doing, it's really hard to once they've joined close combat to keep up with them. And because they're really quick and they can get in close combat quite quickly, it's just hard to deal with for a lot of people. A lot of another notable magic item in the book is Infernal Puppet. When you are within 24 of the wielder of the Infernal Puppet, you have to roll an extra d6 on your casting attempts and discard the highest. So that makes enemy casters a lot worse. It's one of the few ways and actually to get ahead. I think most armies in the game take a level 4 wizard at this point. It's just pretty common sense for people who played a lot of the game, that you just take one or multiple level 4s and you don't really mess around with level 1s or 2s. Unless you have a very specific reason for it. And Infernal Puppet is really a nice way to break the synergy in a way that other armies really do not have, in which if your wizard is within 24 of your opponent, they're a lot worse at casting, you get better at dispelling, while you still get to keep on trucking. So worse Chaos Aggression, pretty one-dimensional. They're gonna come at you, they come at you quickly. They've got a ton of ways to do it. They've got the Chaos Dragons as well, which you can go. You've got the gigantic spawns of chaos, which you can also go and which will let you. They have a ton of great options to do a ton of aggression. Then I go on to the second tiers of armies, which I think are still very much good, but will be quite hard to win a GT, like a 2-day tournament for reasons, I would say. I'm really not saying these armies are bad, I'm just saying that they're somewhat of a notch below what I see as the top 5 armies. High Elves have basically 2 main builds. They have what I would say are double dragon aggression builds. So they have either a star dragon that's completely tooled up, and then a sun dragon with a level 4, or units that are relatively the same, so things like sky cutters or other fast character mounts that are going to fly at you, fly around you and do a ton of damage at you, and along with silver helms and perhaps things like Dragon Princes or Frostheart Phoenixes in Special and Rare, just coming at you and doing a ton of damage. Another way they can build the army is to run a big unit of Sisters of Avalorn. I'm thinking 30, 40. With Travel Mystical Pathways, you can teleport them all over the table. Be really obnoxious to catch. They have they can bring a horn that gives them once per game +1 to hit and +1 to wound. So if you do that with 40 shots, you can even bring down an enemy dragon, which is pretty nice. And what's also important about that is that it also works on your on the magic missiles you cast from the unit. So you can just put 2 level 4s, so you put in it, and they can also do a ton of damage, get a ruin shooting out of there as well, to just have this sort of teleporting denial blob that's really hard to get to. Which is a very solid way of playing the game. And what I think the main issue is of High Elves, I said that you could run Silver Helms, and especially in the Sisters of Avalorn list, your sisters become core, so that's really nice about that list. I think that the High Elf core options are pretty lacking. Silver Helms are fine, but if you compare them to actual good cavalry, stuff like Blood Knights or even Chaos Knights, toughness 3 up save, it's kind of lacking, and all the other options are really quite shit. Archers like Clover Seaguard are just very expensive for what they bring. So I think that the sister unit is good, but I still think it's hard against some armies, especially since a lot of people are playing a ton of aggression, with the dragons, to actually keep your block safe. I mean, if your opponent's kind of slow, you can probably keep your block safe, but when they really start boxing you in and have multiple dragons which you cannot quickly kill, the list doesn't quite work out in some of the good, I'm talking Bretonnia, Wars of Chaos matchups, which I think is holding it back, but it's definite contender. It's a very decent army to play. Next army I'm talking about are Beastmen. I think Beastmen have a pretty good and fast good stuff list. They can run Dragon Ogres, they often run a ton of them, so they're quickly at you, and they basically are quite aggressive. And they have Razor Gores in core, which are sort of you can see them as mini chariots running at you, and they're just do a ton of damage for their points, and they have tons of small units which they can use to pen you in and do the damage they need to do. And of course they have they have Valtide as a very strong spell, and along with the magic item they have to make it so they can reroll to wound on Wildtide. It does 5d6 strength 1 hits, but you cannot take armor saves or regen saves against it, especially if you start rerolling the wounds. If you just start fishing for 6s, you can just do a ton of damage against really expensive things like, for example, dragons. And with the spell Infernal Gateway, you can teleport the characters. They're often on chariots. You can bump them around and cast that spell from all sorts of angles. So it's very hard for your opponent to hide from that. It's just a pretty efficient, aggressive list that can be hard to play against. I think their main issue is that they're kind of short-ranged. Like Wildtide, for example, it has 15 inches and you can do some cool stuff with Infernal Gateway, but you still have to end up within 15 inches of the enemy dragon, so that's still kind of scary for you because you're also in charging range with them. So because they kind of lack in range and because they do not have like the pure efficient aggression of Pegasus Knights and like things like Chaos Dragons and Chaos Knights and Dragon Ogres, they're good, but they're, wouldn't say, quite up there with the greats, as I would say. Another really good army is Orcs and Goblins. It's an army that mainly goes an aggression way. We go like multiple wyverns with black orcs on them. You can give them a 2-up save. You can give them a very easy and cheap 5-up regen save with the Trollhide Risers. You can just go to town on the opponent. I think that's a great way to go, and then you go some level 4s with it. Of course, Night Goblin Fanatics, even though they got nerfed quite a bit, are still very good. You can just run 90 Night Goblins and just spread your Fanatics all over the board and do a ton of damage with that. I think they have some of the best artillery in the game with Doomdiver catapults. Getting to scatter back a little bit and getting to fire indirect shots is quite strong. And some of the ways you can actually do damage to opposing dragons while they're sort of hiding outside of sight, so you force your opponent to do stuff. And they have one of the actually good infantry units in the game, those being Black Orcs with the red raggedy flag, going +1 map skill to web skill 5 is very nice because they're going to start hitting most things on the 3, and with like things like great weapons, they're just going to do a ton of damage in them. Also Motley Crew, so you can they have full plate armor. So you can have some guys with shields, some of them with great weapons, so you can be like a 3-up when you're hitting, 3-up armor save when you're hitting and stuff, but you can hit back with your great weapons, which is very nice. And the red raggedy flag also gives you another combat resolution, which is a very efficient item for what they bring. So I think Orcs Goblins have like a ton of like options they can go. I've seen sort of even more gunline, sort of like denial list with like big units of Night Goblins with Fanatics, keeping you away with like Doomdiver catapults and maybe a Wyvern in the back to keep you safe. Or I've seen lists that go full on aggression with like multiple Wyverns and even squigs to go forward. It's a strong book with tons of options, and then I haven't even mentioned like stuff like Troll Hordes, which can also still be a viable army in its own right. Even though I think it's not as good as what you can get in the main book. Because specifically you have to drop the Wyvern, and the Wyverns are quite good. Another quite strong army are Chaos Dwarfs. Chaos Dwarfs are quite basically a good stuff list. I think they lean heavily on their Iron Demons. They're like toughness 7 steam tanks, which have, for some reason, a Hellblaster volley gun strapped to them. They're only 18 inches, but they do a ton of shooting damage. They do a ton of damage in close combat. They're very hard to kill with like 3-up save, toughness 7, which is like crazy high. Usually think with strength 5 you're sort of getting somewhere, but then you're wounding these things on 6s, then you sort of wonder what you're doing with your life. And with the pretty reasonable movement they have, they can just move forward and do a ton of damage. And I think one of their big strengths as well is the one of the spells, their faction specific spells named Storm of Ash, which in an area of effect around the caster, it gives every opponent -1 to hit, especially if you have like your caster on like an Iron Bull going forward with some Iron Demons around it. You have like a really strong, aggressive block moving forward, where it's pretty hard for opponents to deal with. I think the main thing that's holding them back is they don't really have great core. You have to basically run normal Chaos Dwarfs, which are like slow and don't do that much. Like they're hard to kill, but they're really not contributing to your like main push of like Iron Demons and your guy on your wizard on a mount that are going forward and putting pressure. I think one of the big benefits they have, however, is that they can bring a wyvern as well. They can bring a black orc, and it's quite good. But I think it's really sort of lacking the strategic depth of other armies, and they have maybe similarly to high elves, they do not have the greatest core options. Um, Other armies, basically now we're getting into armies which I think have some more issues. I think dwarves are like the last of the armies that are quite strong, that you can really quite reliably could win an RTT with. The main issue is, of course, that they're quite slow. They're all movement 3. You can go to cards now, but they can get sniped out to go up to movement 4. And like movement 4 with drilled, you can do some fun stuff, but it's all quite slow, and you're still really hard to kill enemy dragons, for example. Because even if you're like shooting cannons, or what I think is even a better option, iron drakes, trollhammer torpedoes into them. You're still having to go through armor saves and region saves and ward saves. And these dragons, because you're slow, they can really pick their engagements and sort of pick you apart and like charge your artillery pieces and kill you by that. So I think that's the main issue of gun lines, is that a lot of like speed is really the name of the game. A ton of dragons in the game right now are actually very quickly. So that's what I think. The gun line sort of dwarf builds are struggling, because they have no sort of dragon standing behind their lines to keep people honest. You can just go all the way forward and not really care about things. And I think sort of a good stuff lists which have a mix of like all the of strong units. For example, I think the unit of hammers with a rune of hesitation, which makes it so enemies always lose their charge bonuses, are very good. So like things like impact hits, it has an impact on tons of things. Like every army gets some benefit when charging, so it's really nice that you lose that on like a big unit. It's very hard for them to get killed. It makes it so you can just run them forward impetuously and have them do some damage. And I think Doomseekers was really quite good, having units that you can throw in, and if they survive the game, you get points, and they can never score your opponent points. To just have like completely useless units in a way that they do not care if they die, which you can just run forward and do damage with, is quite strong. So they're decent, but they really lack speed, I would say, which I guess makes sense with dwarves, but they do not have, I think, enough things to really make up for that lack of speed. Gyrocopters are fun and all, but they die quite quickly and don't do a ton of damage. So even though it's probably correct to run a few, I don't think they fix the army's main issue, namely that they have no good cavalry, no good monsters. Then the final could win an RTT army is the Empire. I've seen a gunline list in which you take like multiple like great cannons, which I think is probably, due to their price, the best artillery in the game. Doing D3+1 wounds is pretty good at high strength, and because of the cannonball bouncing mechanic, you're pretty certain to hit stuff. So along that with engineers, it's really nice. It's a really good way of doing damage. And you can also go like multiple steam tanks along your lines to have like 10 wounds, 2 up save, like behemoths, which are really difficult to get through. Even like opposing star dragons will take a while to bite through the hull of a steam tank. So that's a really nice way of keeping people away. That's a way you can play Empire, I think, and be pretty happy. You can also go the aggressive right, go with, of course, great Demigryph Knights, one of the best monsters cavalry in the game, with their 2-up save and good attacks. Nice and fast at 5th stride. You can just run them forward and then expect them to do a ton of damage. And along with steam tanks and like characters on the Imperial Griffin, they can go forward quite a bit. I feel like even though they sort of are supposed to have like a ton of like sort of viable units, except the Empire Knight, the core is once again quite weak, and they lack like a strong dragon option to really compete with stuff like enemy Star Dragons and the like. And I basically think they're doing something similar as the two, I would say, premier aggression lists, those being Bretonnia and Warriors of Chaos. While not having quite the quality of units that they have, especially like they do not have something like Pegasus Knights with the 360 degrees and all the great rules for the great price, and a Monster Slayer on good units. So I feel like they're sort of when they go aggression route, they sort of try to do what Bretonia is doing, but they're doing it kind of worse. And the gun line is, yeah, it kind of folds to all the fast units people are bringing. So they're okay, but they're kind of a worse version of most other armies. I feel like. Then we go to the first, I would say, struggling armies. I think from the struggling armies, Lizardmen are still probably the best, but they because they have the great units of king skirmishers, they have the best skirmishing units in the game. But against especially Tomb King and Vampire Count's healing, like chip damage really does nothing. So there are just tons of matchups in which they really struggle. They have the downgrade of having to take poor units like Saurus Warriors. And they also have the downgrade of not getting to build actual dragons and having a really bad level 4, which is very expensive. The Slan Made Breachfell not being better at casting. That sort of have like some really standout units, which I think you really want to spam, those being King Skirmishers and Carnosaurs, but just having to take other mediocre units to support them and not having a real answer into the top undead factions makes it so I think they're just kind of Same counts for Dark Elves. I think the main issue of Dark Elves is that they simply lack enough viable units. I think the Black Dragon, of course, is very strong. They can build a strong dragon with, for example, the Pendant of Caliph, which gives a 5 aboard saves, but go up to a 4 aboard save if you're hit by something with strength 5 or more. So against all the things that do not wound your dragon on 6s, you have a 4 aboard save, is really nice. I think that's a really good item, and it's a really like easy build to go. So you go a Black Dragon. I think that's pretty much all they take. And then a Death Hack with the Ogre Blade. They have like always strikes first, and they get a ton of extra attacks. So in a unit with Witch Elves, which you can like teleport forward using one of your level 4s, is quite strong. But like next to those two units, I really do not see what you want to go. I've seen people try to run Shades, but they're like terribly expensive and not that great. They die quite quickly and do not have like reserve move or any real way to keep them out of harm's way. I've seen like people going like mass Shades and then have like big units of Dark Riders in which they bounce like level 4 around and they just run around and like they send forwards like Magical Vortex to do damage. But I feel that's just worse than what the Wood Elves are doing, because they do have the all the reserve move tricks and the Pillars of Fire instead of like the worse Magical Vortexes the Dark Elves have to play. They have terrible core as well. I think there are just no real good core units. So I think it's like quite clear that you go Black Dragon, you go Death Hack, you go unit of Witch Elves, and it's really like, well, what else am I taking? So they just lack enough like strong units, I would say. And even though I've seen experimentation with other stuff and like denial lists, I just think it's worse than Wood Elves. And if you're just a worse copy of an army, I think from a competitive perspective, you should just play Wood Elves if you want to go that way. Ogre Kingdoms are also a list that have a pretty strong good stuff list. They often bring a big unit of Iron Guts with a Cannibal Totem to give them all a 5 Abradium save. So they're like really tough. They got great weapons and they're like a ton of strength 6 attacks out of them. And with something like a level 4 inside of them, they're really like nice anchor point, which is hard for your opponents to kill. So you can do damage while not giving up any VP, which is quite good. Mournfang Cavalry is also quite strong. In taking out enemy threats. They're like sort of similar to Dragon Ogres in that they're fast and they have a good save, a good toughness, and they can just go in there. They also have decent monsters in Stonehorns. You can also mount Tyrants on Stonehorns and put them like into your big unit of Iron Guts with something like a Tenderizer. I think like a main issue Ogres have is that quite a lot in the game has Killing Blow currently, and all their monsters cavalry, all their monsters infantry just dies to Killing Blow 6s. So it's especially if your opponent's like bringing a ton of Killing Blow, like your stuff is like falling down left, right, and center, and there's not much to do about it. Also got some decent shooting, like the cannon is probably a notable unit I could have put on there, but I think it's not quite there, and especially with Killing Blow being a big issue for the army is what I think it makes them really a struggling army. Another army that struggles quite a lot is Chaos Demons. I think they have some good greater demons, like especially the Bloodthirster is really something to contend with typical 10, tons of attacks. It's really good. And they've got some decent core options in Furies, like having some 360 line of sight guys to go mess up your enemy day and make sure your great demons arrive unscathed is pretty nice. But I think their main issue is that even though your Bloodthirster like cost as much as like especially if it's tooled up as an opposing dragon, because they lack access to magic items, you cannot build them as strongly as you can in other armies. Like each gold only has like 4 or 5 items, like 3 or 4 of them are usually just quite bad, so you're just left with one, so that makes your option quite limited. And some items in the main book like Talisman of Protection, Lore Familiar, especially Lore Familiar. I think, for example, like a Keeper of Secrets, if you could 100% that he had a Spectral Doppelganger, he would be quite good, but there's no way for you to go always have Spectral Doppelganger because you do not have access to Lore Familiar, which is quite annoying. So you see what like they cannot just make the builds that other armies can. They cannot use the mainstay armies other armies use that they would really auto-include in their list, like something like Ring of Ruin, because they lack a good shooting would probably be very good on them, but because you cannot do that, it's really bad for them. And they also, of course, have the issue that against magical attacks, so for example, like things like Grail Knights, things like especially the Sins of Avalorn, they all have magical attacks, magic missiles. You lose your ward save against that for some reason. I don't know why. I think it really sucks for Chaos Demons, and things just go dying very quickly. I think you could just make it so their 5 board saves is always on, and they maybe even still be in the struggling category. It really shows the issues they have. And then we're down to the final army, the only army that I think is completely inviable at the moment to play in a tournament. And if you've been following along at home already, you must know that that will be Skaven. No idea what a good Skaven list looks like, if that is even the case. They are very infantry based, and infantry is bad, so that's a big sad. They cannot put their characters on any big mounts, so you cannot like do the other stuff like the magic item stacking the other strong armies in the game do, and they just have no real good units like standout units in the past, like the Help Abomination and the Doom Wheel. I've gotten quite a bit worse, and there's nothing that's really taken their place. I mean, sure, they have like relatively cheap level 4s in Grey Seers and Warpstone tokens to get extra casting. It's quite good, but other armies like Orcs and Goblins have like cheap level 4s as well, so that's not enough to build a list around. So I haven't seen a single good Skaven list yet that has performed to any capacity. If you know of one, do let me know, because right now I think like Skaven is the only army in which if you roll up to a tournament, you think it's almost impossible to really win a tournament. I mean, you can get lucky and like outplay like a few people, but in the top tables, I think it's just too big of a handicap to play. All in all, the complete overview is this. I think most of the armies are quite close to each other. That's quite hard to rank them all. I think especially up to like the dwarves. So if you go left to right, you start on the left with the strongest, and you go weaker all the time. I think especially up to dwarves, you've got some really good tools. So that's like 10 armies that are quite strong and like possible to do really well with, which is quite good for the game. And there's only one army that is that's really struggling in Skaven, that has no real way of building them. So I think that from a balance perspective, I think Games Workshop quite honestly has done very well in making the game, and having armies that all work very differently, but they can all fight and they all have good matchups and bad matchups. I mean, we like to shit on Games Workshop always, of course, but I think it's also important to recognize that they did a pretty good job with the old world here, and that they have given us a pretty balanced game. If you look on army wide scale, and I think, and if you look that you're really only taking strong units. What I've seen a lot is like people like taking non-optimal lists and then like being like, oh yeah, others have so overpowered. It's like, well, if you want to, especially with the sort of mid to low tier armies, you really have to be very specific about the units you bring. You have to be really good in your play. The games definitely get harder, but I think that if you put in the work, if you really have your good army, you can get there. You can win a ton of games against people that are not as experienced as you. So as I was saying, we are sort of starting to see a difference between haves and have-nots. I think that the really good armies have like three main competitive strategies. I've seen a lot like 100% close combat aggression lists that like sort of pen you in and charge as quickly as possible and just do a ton of damage quite quickly. I think like clear examples that are the present double dragon lists like Tomb Kings, High Elves, Orcs and Goblin Wyverns. A lot of armies do like that. And Bretonia and Wars of Chaos have more sort of general purpose pressure lists. And I think that they're maybe even stronger than sort of the Double Dragon list because they have multiple good units. Like especially in the Double Dragon list, you often just have your 2 dragons. And that's like sort of your main thing you're playing with. Or like if you have like and the Green Knight and the Pack Knights and like your Dukes and like all your other guys, you have a lot more strong units. So you have a lot more play instead of like 2 hammers. You've got like 5 a little bit smaller hammers, and I think that gives you more play and is generally even stronger. Also things like Dragon Ogres, of course, add to that. I think we're also seeing a ton of denial slash avoidance lists, so lists that are really built around the idea that you cannot get to grips with them. They either shoot too hard or they like bounce around the table a lot with reserve move. Or travel mystical pathways. If you talk about the High Elf Sisters of Avalorn, the idea about these lists is that while the aggression list, like they expect to lose some guys, but they expect to like wipe you or do just more damage than you and win like that. Like denial avoidance lists, like really want to lose as little as they can and just run around you, be very annoying to you, and win in that way. So I think that's a clear strategy that you see as well. And a weird army in that is the Tomb King Royal Host Death Star, which is it doesn't quite try to avoid you, as it's just standing in the middle of the board shooting at you, but it's a denial list in the sense that it's too big of a unit to kill in the turns of the game that you get, and they do too much damage to really effectively engage them or like sort of start sniping characters out of them or something like that, because standing shoot and other stuff, you will take too much damage before that actually works out. So that in a way it's sort of weirdly similar to like sort of denial, like avoidance list. We see the clear strategy of people making sure that their units do not die. And that's a category of army we really see. And then I would say we also have from the strategies that do not quite fit into those two main strategies, we have where I'd say it are unfair mechanics. Unfair is within quotation marks because I do not think it's actually unfair. I think it's more about that it feels like an exploit. It feels like something that's just being pushed a little bit too hard. Something that is sort of too strong for the rules that we have. For example, with Tomb Kings you can get up to +9 to cast, which makes it so all your spells go off, and it makes it things way more reliable than I think they should be. I think the undead lists also with the leadership check rerolls on their rise checks are just a little bit too reliable on getting all their stuff to work. So I think that's also basically something other armies don't get. Like they do not get like this crazy amount of healing that you have to keep up with your damage. So I think that's really strong. I think Vampire Count Screams are also a part of that. Like especially the rules that you can shoot them in close combat and like shoot them by yourself in close combat, and it all doesn't matter. You can always just scream. Is really strong, and it feels like Vampire Counts players are playing a different game sometimes when they tell you that, yeah, I can scream from this combat into the other combat. So I think that's also quite strong. And I think all the shenanigans with travel mystical pathways, and to a lower extent, Beastmen do that specifically with Infernal Gateway, because there is a rules interpretation now that you do not have to be wholly within 12 inches, but that only your base needs to, a part of your base or like a part of your unit need to be within 12 inches where you started, so you can use that to make teleports that go a whole lot farther than the 12 inches that travel mystical pathway lists. So it's also sort of like an quote unquote unfair mechanic, which you can use to get a lot more leeway out of your units. Just to be clear, I do not think these are things that are necessarily something to be banned or something to change or something to comp. But I feel like you can basically put everything either under close combat aggression or denial and avoidance, and all the things that do not quite fall into that category are certain rules that are just way stronger than whatever the other people are bringing for the points, so that it feels like sort of an overtuned / unfair mechanic. So that's what I mean by that moniker. So that's what I think about the general meta. I think especially with the Arcane Journal books coming out, there's going to be a lot of exploration you can do. What I also promised you at the beginning of this video is kind of an idea. What does your army need to be competitive? If you wanna play in competitive tournaments. I think that what you've seen today is that it's really important to have a clear answer to deal with enemy dragons. So either a monster slayer or some type of denial or something you can put in front of them, like maybe like a steam tank that at least takes them a while to get through. You need a plan to deal with dragons, and if you do not have a plan to deal with dragons, list probably gonna suffer. And I mean, a lot of people say like, dragons are lame, dragons are too strong. I mean, they're part of the competitive meta. If you wanna compete, you're going to need a plan to deal with them, no matter how you feel about it. Same thing can be said about the Tomb King Death Star. I think it's relatively easy to collect because a lot of Tomb King players have a lot of skeletons. So I'm thinking that if they do not get fixed, because well, I think dragons are fine. I personally think the Tomb King's Death Star is really unfun. I think it's really not interesting to play against like one big unit of 100 skeletons. Also like weird characters that can intercept wounds for each other and heal each other and sort of stuff. It's not that fun at all. Unless the tournament you're going to is not that competitive, or they like have like a maximum size on the amount of models you have in them, or something. I think you need a plan to deal with them. So to either be aggressive or do enough damage to them to make sure you do not fall to that list. And kind of linked to that is that you need a method to put pressure on opposing defensive lists, like wood elves that are gonna like reserve moves in and out of forests and keep outside of line of sight, or like Tombing bow lines, or like the bouncing around high elf Sisters of Avalorn list. I think you need a way to be able to mitigate enemy pressure from the dragons, but I also think you need a way to put enemy pressure with like fast units, flying units, probably to keep up with them. So it's a whole lot of information. That's mostly what I wanted to say to you today. Thank you for your continued support, and I think I'm just gonna see, like, make a video every once in a while. I think I still have plenty of ideas about things I want to talk about. So if you're here and interested to hear more about the old world, make sure to check back in sometime, and I hope hearing from you to see what you think.